What's going on, everybody? Josh Engleman here for Stokastic.com, back again with those NFL DFS contenders for week 3 on DraftKings. Now be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you know when everything goes live. Follow me on Twitter at Josh Engleman. Only place you're going to get updates to these sims as we get closer to lock. Finally, check out Prize Picks. Easiest way to do that? There's a link in the description of this video. Head on over, sign up, make a deposit. They'll match anything up to $100. So if you put in 50, they're going to give you 50. If you put in 100, they're going to match with 100. It's a pretty solid deal. You don't need an optimizer. We're talking about player props, over-unders. You hit 5, you can net up to 10x your entry fee. We got tools at Stokastic that can help you out as well. Now, we got the defenses on the screen. Not a lot separating the top from the bottom, and we know that at this point in time. This is week 3. It's old hat with the defenses. If you like one, Panthers are my number 1 for right now. Who knows where that ends up landing as we move on further, but what I do want to give you guys are my top 5 quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends for the week. So, without further ado, let's get it started. Dawson Knox, Logan Thomas, Juwan Johnson, Evan Engram, and Gerald Everett round out the bottom of the top 10. Dallas Goedert in at number 5. There's a big tie right here, which you're going to see. 4,700 for Goedert, projected for 11.5. Philly, 6-point favorites against my Commanders, 47.5 point total. You're not expecting a monster day out of Goedert. Going for 30 fantasy points seems pretty unlikely at 1%. He's your optimal tight end 7% of the time. As you can, there's very little difference between Goedert, Everett, Engram. Honestly, like Dawson Knox at 4% isn't even crazy. We really got to get to the tippy top of tight end before we see any sort of real separation in optimal odds. But if you like Dallas Goedert this week, go for it. Similarly, at number 4, we've got Kyle Pitts with basically the same salary and projection, 4,800, projected for 11.5. Falcons are 1-point dogs to Seattle, 42-point total. This is a battle of 2 very not good football teams. We're going to see, this is going to have a lot to do with the jockeying at the end of the season of who's going to get the better pick. Again, 1% chance for Pitts to go for north of 30, 7% likelihood he's in the optimal. You can mix and match Pitts, Goedert, Everett, and Engram. They're all the same in terms of optimal odds, 7% across the board. Salary is really the only differentiator here, but now we're stepping it up a little tiny bit. We go to HAYDEN HURST at number 3, 3,900, projected for 10 fantasy points. Bengals taking on the Jets, 6-point favorites, 45-point total. This one looks better because it's just a slightly better value than what we saw before. 9% likelihood for Hurst. We'll talk about Hurts later. Hurst to be in the optimal. Really weird. That's tough to say if I'm being perfectly honest. Since he should beat up the Jets, I know that the Bengals haven't been what we wanted them to be. I think it's been a little bit of bad luck, a little bit of their own regard, but they should go out there and handle business. And I think for 3,900, there aren't many better options to try to buy some touchdown equity. Well, one of them shows up right here. Irv Smith, 3,100, projected for 8.5. Minnesota, 6-point favorites against Detroit. 52.5 point total. I assume the Vikings want to get some of the stank off of them from last week. You're not going for 30 with Irv Smith, and that's totally fine. Irv Smith just simply unlocks other things. It could just unlock more in a stack with the Vikings if you want some of their other pass catchers, or Dalvin Cook potentially. 11.5% chance that Irv Smith is your optimal. We're gonna round that one up to 12 as you see in the table. That is the big jump, but it's not enough to get to the number 1 spot. And that number 1 spot goes to Mark Andrews, 6,900, a very different play than Irv Smith. Projected for 17.5 fantasy points. Baltimore, 2.5-point favorites against the Patriots, 44-point total. 11% chance that Mark Andrews goes for north of 30. 13% likelihood that he is optimal at the tight end spot. He's not even close to the rest of the guys that we just talked about. Very different salary, very different upside. If you have the money, please go to Mark Andrews. If you're playing cash and you can get there, it's probably Irv Smith because you want to pay up elsewhere. But by all means, get to Mark Andrews. I don't think that anybody else on this list has the same ceiling, and sometimes you're just going to need those raw points. Jalen Waddle, Mike Williams, Jacoby Myers, Devontae Adams, and Justin Jefferson round out the bottom of my top 10 at wideout. I didn't change the screen, but I'll do it while we're here. You can get a look-see. Russell Gage in at number 5. You see it all happen. I don't have to make any cuts here. I'll just show you guys what's going on. 4,700 for Gage, projected for 12.5. Tampa, a 1-point favorite against Green Bay, 42-point total. 4% chance for Gage to go for north of 30, so there's a little tiny bit of upside here. 11% likelihood that he is in the optimal. Again, we're going to see a little bit more separation at the top, but when it comes to value receivers, it's obvious, it scares me a lot, just generally speaking, taking guys that are going to catch passes from Tom Brady because he can throw to like 200 different dudes in one game. But for 4,700, I think that risk is very warranted for Russell Gage. At number 4, we're going to my Commanders for Curtis Samuel, 5,100, projected for 13.2 fantasy points. Unfortunately for Washington, they are 6-point dogs against Philly with that 47.5-point total, but I expect them to have to throw the ball in the second half, and that is quite the benefit. 6% chance for Samuel to go for north of 30, so there is some upside. 28% chance that he simply goes for less than 10, and that lineup is not going to be looking as great as you would like it to. 12% chance, though, that he is in the optimal. Very flat here. Samuel down to Waddle at 10. There's not a ton of separation, but again, for a value wide receiver, whether it's Gage or Samuel, there's a pretty easy way to save some money this week. Another guy in the mid-tier that we can get to is number 3, Brandin Cooks, 5,800, projected for 16 fantasy points. Texans are 3-point dogs against Chicago. 39.5-point total isn't the most exciting thing in the world. There are a lot of games with better totals and more expected fantasy points, but I think that still works for Cooks. 9% likelihood to go for north of 30, 12% chance he is in the optimal lineup. But again, just tied with Curtis Samuel. Again, very flat wide receiver ownership. For the 3rd straight week, we're not seeing anybody really break free from the pack. There's no broken salaries. There's no guy is out and stepping into a new role and just isn't priced correctly. We're just seeing sort of everything be correct, which makes it a lot more difficult to build lineups that you're happy about. If you want to make a ceiling play, Cooper Kupp feels like a decent option. 9,900, projected for 26.5 fantasy points. Rams, 3.5-point favorites against the Cardinals, 48.5-point total. Kupp goes north of 30, 38% of the time. He's optimal 15% of the time. You need a ton of points out of Cooper Kupp to try to justify that $9,900 salary, but are you ever surprised when he has a big day? This dude is a targets monster. He's a yardage monster. He's a touchdowns monster. He's incredible. But the price is a little high, and it wasn't enough to get him to the number 1 spot. But he is tied for it, though, with AMON-RA St. Brown, 7,200, projected for 19 fantasy points. And honestly, I'm happy to see him number 1 because he's on my wife's fantasy team, so I actually want him to succeed. The Lions are underdogs against Minnesota. You know they're going to be throwing 50-point total, so you know they're going to be throwing. I love this spot for St. Brown. He's been great for the first 2 weeks. 19% chance to go for north of 30, just an 8% likelihood to be under 10. The price tag works, the matchup works, the total works. And in terms of optimal percentage, that works too because he is at the top of the heap. 15% just edges out Cooper Kupp for my number 1 spot. Christian McCaffrey, Miles Sanders, Alvin Kamara, James Conner, and Dameon Pierce round out the bottom of the top 10 at running back. Dalvin Cook in at number 5, 7,900. Pretty nice price tag here. Projected for 20 fantasy points. The line is 6. The total looks good. 17% chance to go for more than 30. Just a 12.5% chance to be in the optimal. I'm honestly a little surprised. I love this price tag for Dalvin Cook. I love this matchup for Dalvin Cook. If he gets in the end zone early, he could be in for a monster day because it's highly likely that Minnesota is just pounding Detroit, and that is going to look really good for Cook in the second half. I'm truly surprised that he doesn't rank a little bit higher. I thought he might be in the top 2 group where they're kind of separating from the pack a little bit. In terms, he could be in the mid-8s, and I think he would still look pretty good. I like the upside of Dalvin Cook this week. Pair him with Irv Smith if you want. We go to Josh Jacobs at number 4, 5,400, projected for 14.5 fantasy points. The Raiders, 2-point favorites against Tennessee, 45.5-point total. Different kind of play here since he's in the mid-tier. About a 5% chance that he could score 30, which would be great. 13% chance that he's optimal, which means you don't really need 30. You probably need something in that 24, 25 range. I think that looks pretty good here. Indifferent though about Jacobs. You know, the line is fine. He's going to be involved on both sides, but like 45.5 points, there are better scripts out there, but that doesn't really matter because at 5,400, I just think he's a pretty good value. Or you could pay up a little bit more for the same sort of optimal odds, 7,600 for Joe Mixon, 19.5 fantasy point projection. We touched on the Bengals earlier. Great spot against the Jets. 16% likelihood he goes for north of 30. So there is a pretty sizable ceiling here. 13.5% chance that he is optimal. And those are pretty close. So you're looking at like, you need 27, 28 out of Joe Mixon for him to be in that optimal conversation. And I think that's more reasonable against the Jets. There's a ton of pass catching options for Cincinnati for sure. But would you be all that surprised if Mixon gets a couple of those catches and just pounds the ball on the ground? I sure wouldn't. And now we get to number 2, Leonard Fournette, 6,500, projected for 18.7 fantasy points here for Tampa Bay. 1-point favorites, 42-point line, 12% chance to go for more than 30, 17% chance he's in the optimal, so you need a bit less than 30. I mean, they're dropping like flies in Tampa. Fournette's just getting more and more of the role. He's like their number 1 receiver and their running back at the exact same time. It's craziness. He should get a ton of work this week. I don't know how it's going to come in, but whether it's catching balls, grinding runs, whatever we need out of Leonard Fournette, I think we're getting it this week. It's a fantastic spot to get to Lenny Fournette, and he still can't get to that number 1 spot. That number 1 spot belongs to David Montgomery, 5,900, projected for 17 fantasy points. Bears 3-point favorites with a total that isn't all that appealing, but not many other people out there for the Bears going to be able to do anything other than Montgomery. 10% chance that he can go for north of 30. 18% chance that he is in the optimal, which means you probably need like 24 or 25 out of Montgomery. That seems very reasonable against the Texans. I hate the total in this game, but the total also points you in the direction of thinking that David Montgomery is going to get a lot of work. And at 5,900, that price tag works no matter what kind of build you're trying to put together. Now, before we finish it off with the quarterbacks, one last reminder, like, subscribe, notification bell so you know when everything goes live. Follow me on Twitter at Josh Engleman. Hop in the comments and let me know, who are your favorite plays this week across all of the positions? I want to know what you guys are looking at. And finally, go check out Prize Picks. Link is in the description. Get yourself up to $100 on your first deposit. Now, there is no separation at quarterback this week, but Mariota, Lamar Jackson, Pat Mahomes, Carr, Herbert, and then Matt Stafford in at number 5, 6,500, projected for 20.5. Rams, Cardinals, you know he's going to sling it around. You know Cooper Kupp's going to be on the other side of some of it. 16% chance Stafford goes for more than 30, but just a 5.5% chance he is in the optimal. Pay close attention to what's going on at wide receiver and tight end, because that should dictate what you're getting to at quarterback this week, especially this week, where there is basically no distinction, in my opinion, between 1 and 10. At number 4, we go to Joe Burrow, 6,600, projected for 21, hoping that he can beat up the Jets a bit here. 18.5% chance to go for more than 30, but just a 7% chance to be the optimal quarterback. It's so tricky to be the optimal quarterback because multiple people are going to go for north of 30 fantasy points, and you can get there with any of them. It's all about what you have elsewhere. Clearly, since he has the pass catchers to put together a fantastic stack against the Jets, and that's all that I'm really looking for in this spot. It was pretty gross last week, but maybe it'll be a little bit better here against the Lions. 6,700 for Kirk Cousins, former Commander, so I have a very, very small piece in my heart for this man. 22.5-point projection. Minnesota should smack around Detroit. The total looks great, though. 52.5 here. We could get a lot of scoring out of Kirk Cousins. He could spread it around. You saw Irv Smith on the list earlier. Justin Jefferson, obviously. Projected to go over 30, 24% of the time, but basically a quarter of the time. That looks good, but still, just an 8% likelihood to be in the optimal. Cousins looks great. I don't think a lot of people are going to want to go to Kirk Cousins, which makes the stack look a little bit more appealing to me. Now we get to Jalen Hurts. Big day last week. 7,600 here, projected for 25. Philly 6-point favorites against the Commanders. 30% likelihood to go for north of 30. 8% likelihood to be the optimal. You know he could help you out big time on the ground. There are some options in the passing game that you can stack up with Jalen Hurts. Is his salary a little high? Yeah, it is. But does this matchup look pretty good for Hurts? Yeah, it does. Almost good enough to get him to the number 1 spot. That number one spot to Josh Allen, 8,200, projected for 27 fantasy points. Damn, Buffalo's good. 5-point favorites with a 52.5 point total, and he is 39% likely to go north of 30. 9% chance Josh Allen is in the optimal. It's going to cost you a ton, but you are going to get a ton out of Allen. He is the quarterback of the best team in football. Yeah, I said it. It's not even close to me, honestly. He could have a monster day. A 27-point fantasy projection is no joke to the start. And we can see him with a much bigger ceiling, but you got to pay to get there. Plenty of options on Buffalo that you could stack up with him, but if you just need one quarterback with the highest likelihood of being your optimal QB, Josh Allen is your man. Alrighty, folks, that will do it. Those are my NFL DFS contenders on DraftKings for week 3. FanDuel version of this video is around here somewhere, so check it out. Good luck tonight, everybody. Win some money. We are back again Sunday morning for another edition of the Contenders.